Welcome, everybody, to the Immersive Learning Research Network's webinar series that's just kicking off. iLearn starts their new fiscal year at the beginning of the school year each year, September 1st. And we're kicking off with the theme for the 2025 11th Annual International Conference for iLearn, which is Reading the World, Multimodal Literacies and Immersive Learning. So we're really excited. Sorry, I had a spam call. We're really excited about our inaugural speaker, Dr. Stephanie Moore, to kick us off with this incredible multimodal literacies theme. And if I could just tee Stephanie up with a bit of an intro here on her background, I'll turn it right over to Stephanie, and we'll dig right in. One thing before we get going, and I said this already, but just to be sure, please, everybody, feel free to use the chat. I'll do as good of a job as I can to moderate looking into the chat, and I won't interrupt Stephanie if I don't have to, which we won't. But as things go there at the end of her presentation, if there's time, we will get to those questions and perhaps have some dialogue. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for supporting the Immersive Learning Research Network. We're a nonprofit global network of professionals around the world developing and promoting the Association of Expertise in Immersive Learning as an emerging discipline. So Stephanie Moore is an associate professor in the Organization, Information, and Learning Sciences program at the University of New Mexico, where she teaches adult learning, online learning, and assessment, multimedia design and development, and ethics for learning and workforce technology. Her latest book is on ethics and learning design called Ethics and Educational Technology, Reflection, Interrogation, and Design as a Framework for Practice, just released last year in 2023. She's a speaker for the United States Department of State Speaker Series and regularly meets with foreign embassies and educational leaders around the world to discuss effective use of learning technologies such as online learning. She was also recently a fellow with the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy, who is sponsoring the Immersive Learning Research Network this year for our conference. So thank you, Ken Bigger and the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. So she works with them on research and investment strategies for learning technologies that support literacy and education. Stephanie also serves as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Computing in Higher Education, and she's a board member for the Open Technology and Education Society and Scholarship Association, or colloquially known as OTESA. So thank you so much again for coming, Stephanie. We're excited about your presentation, and take it away. Thank you.
All righty. Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me. And we do have some Barbara Bush colleagues on the call, including Andrew, who's the president of the foundation, and Sarah Caccio, who is always organizing the best things. So I just adore their socks off. So with that, let's get going. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here. So today I'm going to focus on a couple of different themes together. Adult literacy as a grand challenge for learning, design, and research. So this is really going to be framed as a call to action, like I say right in my title, for immersive learning designers and developers and researchers. I think there's a role that whether you're more towards the research end of the spectrum or more towards the practice and development end of the spectrum, we can all play a role in tackling this really important challenge. So before I get going, I'm going to start by explaining the image that I've picked here. It's actually an image from our book that we own because we really like this idea of a jawbreaker. That's actually a jawbreaker. Most folks think it's a geode. But my co-author's husband went out. We got enamored with this idea of a broken jawbreaker, and he went out to a candy store and found this huge jawbreaker and brought it home and tried to neatly slice it open. And of course, it doesn't. It breaks and cracks and whatnot. But as I think about some of these grand challenges, I think of them as being sort of like Jawbreaker. There's a lot going on there. It takes a lot of work to actually crack it. And they're very, very multi-layered, right? And very complex. Nonetheless, they're probably worth it. so, so let's dive into talking about grand challenges broadly and adult literacy specifically. So in our field, of course, Tom Reeves had and some other colleagues have written about how for far too long we have focused on things instead of problems. Our research, our scholarship, even the way in which we talk about our expertise really tends to be centered around a thing. You know, for example, I'll often describe myself as an expert on online learning. That's a thing, instead of organizing around problems. Now, online learning is an interesting one for me because the organizing ethos for online and distance education for a long time has been the problem of access to education. So that's really the underlying problem. So if I were to reframe my own focus using Reeves and Reeves, I would say I'm really focused on reducing barriers to access and increasing pathways to education. And sometimes I use online and distance learning to help accomplish that.
Mhm.
So, educational technology research does not have a distinguished record in dealing with local educational problems, much less global ones. And this is sort of a gauntlet that Tom and Lynn Lipsmeyer threw down in 2020. Their article is "The Research We Have is Not the Research That We Need." So I'm drawing from this premise that for far too long, we've really been focused on the things and instead really need to orient around the problems that we're trying to tackle. This is where the idea of grand challenges come in. So I'm going to talk through a little bit briefly here about what are grand challenges and some examples, and then we'll dive down into adult literacy as a grand challenge. So broadly speaking, grand challenges are major, complex problems, jawbreakers, in a field that should be solvable within a generation or two, that would have great societal and economic impact depending on how they are addressed or left unaddressed. George and colleagues define global challenges as grand challenges as global problems that can be plausibly addressed through coordinated and collaborative effort. Now, if you really want to dig in and learn more, and I'm going to be actively advocating for this in the field, that we engage in a Grand Challenges initiative. There's actually a site dedicated to it, grandchallenges.org. And when you go there, you will see that many entities you will recognize have engaged in a Grand Challenges process of identifying what are our priorities and then how are we going to address those priorities. Now, I'm going to circle back to one key word here, the word solvable. There's a lot of challenges that a lot of other fields or organizations are taking on. I don't think they consider them to be solvable, right? I don't think that they're thinking, if we work on this, just put our shoulder to the plow for 10 or 20 years on this, we're going to have it all done, wash our hands of it, yay us. Rather, they are saying, we will get further down the field. We're going to move that ball down the field. I grew up in football country. So we'll be able to move that ball further down the field if we identify this as a priority and say that we are going to coordinate and collaborate around that. And we want to see that we have some sort of observable or measurable impact on this problem. One of the largest grand challenges initiatives I've ever seen is engineering. I used to work in a school of engineering. This is where I really learned about this. In fact, when they were first organizing their grand challenges, I got to go sit in on some of the workshops that were part of the conversations behind this. Again, if you want to go read more and see how they're organizing this, honestly, it's easy enough to find all of this if you just type in grand challenges and then engineering or whatever, into a search bar, and you'll kick it up right away. But this is engineering site. It's an extremely well organized global initiative that has had significant impact on their research, on their development, and on research funding, on all of the national funding agencies. And that was their intent, was rather than the field being driven by, say, National Science Foundation's research priorities, the field of engineering said, we want to have a conversation of this. We want to be able to influence what your funding priorities are so that we feel like we can identify an organized and coordinated research agenda for the field. Mm-hmm. For them, they've got 4 cross-cutting themes across their different challenges that they've adopted. Those themes are sustainability, health, security, and joy of living. I'm highlighting this because of the clear emphasis that this places on the impact that engineering is having on the world, on society, and on the local communities around them. Engineering actually has a very robust conversation about this. They've done a lot of integrating it into their curriculum. And then you can see it here again, also showing up in their strategic planning for their research and development. They've also got 14 goals. Not going to read through all of those, but I thought I would at least highlight it to make it easy enough for you to see. Some of them are very technical goals. Others are kind of a mix of like technical and social, like making solar energy more economical, engineering better medicines, providing access to clean water. So these may not be ones that you may necessarily agree are priorities, but the field of engineering convenes these large meetings to have researchers and developers come together and talk about what are our priorities and what are we going to identify as our goals and how are we going to organize ourselves around this. So one thing I'll call out, because I'm with a group of learning designers, is notice how these 14 goals are sort of have the hints of objectives. We're really good at writing learning objectives. So I think we should be able to get right on this. Some other quick examples of grand challenges. Social work, the field of social work has grand challenges for social work. And you can visit their site to learn more. Math education. I thought I'd pull in another education example, but the National Council of Teachers for Mathematics organized a grand challenges and have identified what are their priorities. UNM has a whole grand challenges initiative. So what I'm trying to do or say here is grand challenges aren't just Stephanie's brainchild, right? This is a long-standing organizing concept that I really want to encourage the field of instructional design to tap into. So yes, we can. A profession that is in society, not outside of society. I don't know how many of you know or read or remember Dale Breathauer and his work. And this comes from a really hilarious debate that we had in our literature where Roger Kaufman, who was my advisor, basically argued that we can save the world using HPT, human performance technology. Now, if you know Roger and you're familiar with his work, you know that his strategic planning model starts with societal impact first. And that's always been Roger's argument, that we need to be starting with what impact do we have on society first, and then you backwards plan from there. Don Winnicke replied saying, that's kind of a big ask and also a bit maybe egotistical to think that we can solve all of the world's problems with HPT. And Dale Breathauer replied with a rejoinder to Don Winnicke's rejoinder saying, yes, we can. And I love this quote from Dale. He says, I would rather be involved in saving the world than destroying it. Everything I do contributes in a small way to one or the other, to saving the world or destroying it. I can help save the world by functioning as a human performance technology professional. I'm not qualified to help as a farmer, as a construction worker, as a mathematician, physicist, chemist, social worker, so on. I make my contribution to saving the world by applying methods, principles, and concepts. Now, when I read iLearn's mission, I feel like it radiates a message of yes, we can. And it's baked right into your mission, right? Of advancing the quality of immersive learning to benefit humanity and the world. There's a very optimistic vision here of what we can do and how it is that we function in society. So, Grand Challenges in Instructional Design and Technology. We haven't had a Grand Challenges initiative to date. If we're going to shift from things to problems, then I would propose that we have a Grand Challenges initiative. Grand Challenges place an emphasis on identifying problems as priorities, organizing and coordinating efforts, and evaluating that impact over time. So this is a way to take a very strategic approach to saying, if we want to benefit humanity, what does that mean? I think, again, for me, this really harkens a sort of Roger Kaufman-esque approach of how do we not just assume we're having a positive benefit, but become very intentional and planful about that as we identify what are problems and priorities. What do we need to organize and coordinate efforts around, and how are we going to actually evaluate and discuss that impact over time? So every time I think about this and I talk about this, I remember this scene from A Close Shave, one of the Wallace and Gromit movies. I don't know if you've seen this, but there's a scene where all of the sheep end up on the motorcycle. And Wallace is somewhere at the top, of this ladder. And he yells down, "Get yourselves organized down there." And then they pop into formation. So I'm really hoping that what we can do is get ourselves organized and start to pop into formation around some things. And that's, I'm going to try and save a lot of time for us today to talk about what do we mean, so we can start to get ourselves organized down there. Okay, adult literacy as a grand challenge that we can organize around. Adult literacy is a substantial problem in the US and globally. That may come to as a surprise to many of you, but I'm gonna talk through some of the statistics real quick to help you start to understand the nature and the scope of this problem. In the United States, 52% of adults, defined as ages 16 to 65, scored at level 2 or lower in adult literacy on the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies, or the PIAC. That is an international standard for tracking adult literacy and numeracy rates globally. Level 3 literacy on the PIAC, considered the minimum level for proficiency and roughly equivalent to a minimum 6th grade level, is defined as adults at this level can be considered proficient at working with information and ideas in texts. Their higher literacy skills range from the ability to understand, interpret, and synthesize information across multiple complex texts to the ability to evaluate the reliability of resources and infer sophisticated meanings and complex ideas from written sources. So if 52% of adults are below that, I think you can start to understand what the implications of that are. That what this means is that folks are having trouble, 52% of adults in the US have trouble either reading a text or making sense of the information that they read across 2 or more sources of information. So I'm speaking today with a highly educated crowd. We maybe tend to feel a sense of frustration with, we go out, we read multiple news articles, multiple research papers, we make sense across all of those, and we wonder, why aren't people, doing the same? Why aren't they able to do the same and come to the same conclusions? It's actually a lot of folks who have trouble making sense across multiple sources. So 33% of US adults are at level 2, where adults have some degree of reading proficiency, but they still struggle with text-based information, especially with critically evaluating information and complex claims across 2 or more sources. 19% of US adults are level 1 or below, meaning that they have difficulty using or comprehending print materials, or may be able to decode simple texts, but cannot draw inferences or combine multiple sources. So I hope you're starting to see how adult literacy isn't just about reading, about being able to read the words on a screen or on a page, but it's about making meaning, being able to make meaning across those texts as well. A 2012 cross-country comparison of PIAC data across 22 countries conducted by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development indicated minimal variation on this data globally. And a very recent 2021 UNESCO report found that 773 million adults around the world have little to no literacy skills, and that this, of course, disproportionately affects women and people of color. So we have a substantial problem. In addition to that, we have extremely limited research and funding. I'm going to talk about the research gaps in just a bit for developing interventions and resources. This is both a learning problem and a societal problem where leveraging technologies can play a role. And this particular problem influences other problems such as misinformation and disinformation. And addressing this challenge also stands to have a substantial economic and quality of life impact for learners. So I'll give you just a quick, I'll diverge here just quickly. And if anybody from Barbara Bush Foundation wants to jump in and add nuance or detail, absolutely feel free to in the chat. But for example, we may think of reading as, reading a newspaper article or, reading something online. But think of this too in terms of how that might impact somebody who goes into the doctor's office and gets their prescription, and they go to the pharmacy, they pick it up, and they get it home, and they can't read the prescription label. So there's a well-known, well-documented problem with literacy tying to health literacy, and folks taking the wrong dosage, taking the wrong amount, things like that. So addressing adult literacy as a sort of root cause or root need starts to cascade out and have a lot of potential positive effects for individuals if we address this particular grand challenge. Both of these for adult literacy, I think this is a problem where we could substantially move the ball down the field in a generation or two. And I think this is also technology agnostic, right? There's some folks who have been working on an AI adaptive system or an intelligent tutor, but we really don't have a lot. There's a few mobile solutions out there, and some attempts at some gaming, but we really don't have a lot. And as you're going to see in a bit, we really don't have a lot of research that speaks to the efficacy of what we do have as well. So I want to frame the problem a little bit more around access barriers. Place-based education access is difficult for adult learners. Changing work hours, access to transportation, reliability of those transportation options, childcare needs, related costs, all of that. These are very well documented barriers to access of place-based adult education. These studies also document how these barriers translate into issues with retention and persistence among in-person adult literacy programs. And participation rates tracked annually by Pro Literacy, which is a major organization working on this, reflect the significant gap between the number of adults at level 2 or below and the number of adults who actually access education services that would help them develop their literacy skills further. Adult literacy programs also face additional challenges. Many have open enrollments, so an adult learner can start at any time, but this also means students are entering and exiting programs at highly variable points and have highly variable needs and existing abilities. High attrition rates and unpredictable participation patterns make it difficult to evaluate interventions and learner progress. I have been out in the field trying to assess and study some, and I can tell you this is not easy data to gather. So for researchers who are motivated to churn things out quickly, this is not an easy space. It's a heck of a lot easier to write an opinion piece on AI and get that published. So this whole set of issues leads to sorry, let me go back. Yeah, high attrition rates. Oh, Picard in 2019 also observed that federal accountability policies have further erected barriers to access by inadvertently disincentivizing programs from serving adults with reading difficulties, because literacy participants often do not show enough improvement over a defined period of time on required standardized tests for a program to meet federally funded targets for funding, federally mandated targets for funding. So this leads to a scarcity of adult literacy classes. Larger literacy gaps can be difficult to close in the mandated windows, motivating programs to focus on learners closer to federal funding targets, such as high school equivalency and workforce credentials. So we have some challenges. Like I said, this is like a jawbreaker. It's multi-layered. It's a very complex. It's a wicked problem, but I think it's a worthwhile problem for us to tackle. Could learning technologists help meet this need? A number of folks, Jen Vanek is at World Education and has written on this, as have some of her other colleagues. Learning technologies could reduce barriers to access, provide more flexible options for learners, increased privacy and dignity. This is a really important one for adult learners, where often they may feel uncomfortable going into an environment where others can readily see the challenges that they're having. And in some research, I'll talk about this in just a little bit, when technology actually affords them some privacy in the process and some dignity in that learning, then learners really tend to like those environments and engage more. And then, of course, also having designing more situated learning opportunities that connect more directly to people's work and personal lives and activities. Around all of this, though, we have a persistent shortage of research and development. Now, I think in the call on the website, we linked to a report that we put out through the Barbara Bush Foundation and a scoping review and an evidence and gap map that I published in ETR&D. So those are two resources if you want to, read more deeply, but I'm going to summarize this very quickly. Rose Vanek said, look, research on actual evidence is quite thin. Art Gracer, who's been doing a lot of research in this space, integration of, and therefore the study of digital technologies into adult learning has been minimal or absent in major programs that prepare teachers and tutors. Housel and Oranjan said more recently, evaluations of instructional practices in adult EAL programs in the US, including any ed tech use, were not abundant. I feel like that's such an understatement. Were not abundant in the recent extant research. And then in our reports last year, we concluded it is clear that while learning technologies may hold promise for adult literacy, there is a sizable evidence gap. This gap makes it difficult to develop policies and initiatives that are informed by such evidence. So we have a clear need and a clear gap, and this is a community that is well poised to help address that. We conducted a scoping review from 2010 to 2022, which was, quote unquote, present at the time of our study. We could only find 21 studies in that 12-year window. Those studies had a range of contexts and technologies and strategies. So while there were 21 studies, and that may seem like a lot, I would argue that over 12 years, that's not a lot. The range of context, technologies, and strategies makes it very difficult to draw any conclusions about efficacy of a given technology or a given strategy. For example, the context of the studies varied greatly. 8 of the studies were in adult education centers or programs. 4, however, were conducted in college courses, which means they weren't actually conducted with the target population. 4 were in an informal learning context. And in 3 of the studies, the context was unclear. 1 was conducted in a formal open education initiative, 1 with incarcerated adults, and then 1 with that the authors described as post-literacy. And it wasn't very clear what that meant. Additionally, there are issues with non-standard outcomes and instruments. Let's see. Yeah, although our primary interest was and review emphasized literacy, which might suggest an emphasis on literacy outcomes, we identified 13 different outcomes that were measured in the studies. In many of the studies, the authors measured literacy or reading comprehension, as well as other variables like numeracy, motivation, usability, or disengagement. So this was kind of all over the place, and there were even a few instances. There are some standard instruments that you can use to measure literacy, and a lot of studies used one of those, which is fine, and we can crosswalk that data. But in some studies of those 21, they actually measured students' perception of learning, not actual learning, which is a problematic measure in and of itself. So here's the gap map. And to summarize just very quickly, over here, these are the tools that were reflected in the research that we found. And these are the measures or the outcomes that were being measured in those studies. Now, to help you interpret this, the larger red dots means there were 3 studies in that particular category. The slightly smaller green dots means there were 2, and then the black dots means there was 1. So you can scan this very quickly, and I'm more than happy to make these slides available. And again, you've got the reports as well, and you can read that in our analyses in detail. But you can see, for example, the AI auto tutor group, they've been very active. They've had some large grants. So, there's been a lot of activity around that. You can see perceptions of technology is measured almost as frequency as basic literacy. In some cases, in many cases, basic literacy wasn't even what was being measured. Some focus more on vocabulary acquisition. This one focused on motivation. Lots of people gathering data on perceptions of technology. And I don't want to be too dismissive of perceptions of technology, but I think a gap map like this can help you see how I as a journal editor, I actually tend to reject articles that focus on perceptions of technology, because it's not helping us answer some of the basic questions of, but did the learners learn as a result of the intervention that you introduced? So I think this is a good example or good snapshot of where we are maybe doing too much of one thing. Doesn't mean it needs to be 0, but we need to be doing more of other research looking at other outcomes. You can also see lots of empty white boxes here. Now, maybe some of those boxes aren't ones that we really want to fill. You can also see what tools people have tested and how they have tested that. So AutoTutor is a specific AI where they had 3 studies. There were also 3 studies in our data set, 3 completely different studies on different mobile learning implementations. But for the rest of these, we have very limited evidence and data. Instead of looking by technology, we also decided to look by the strategy that was used. You guys know as well as I do that mobile learning, for example, or online learning can employ very different strategies. So we decided to also look at what's the strategy being employed and how does that crosswalk with these different learning outcomes. Here you can start to see, okay, we've got a few studies looking at like gamification and basic literacy and reading comprehension. We've got a few studies looking at direct instruction or practice with feedback. These 2 in particular, we have such a large evidentiary base that, you know, we know that these tend to be really effective strategies. And yet, you know, we have very limited research around this. I would love to see this expand more to explore additional strategies that we might want to employ, as well as provide more evidence around strategies that we would have a hunch that are probably going to be very effective strategies to use. Despite the shortage, we could identify some very promising directions and design strategies. And I'm going to walk through these very quickly, just because as we move in, and I'll wrap up here shortly, and we start thinking about what are our next steps or future directions, I think these start to give us a hint of what is it we want to be considering. So some promising strategies that came out in the literature. Technology that is more situated and more authentic tends to be more effective. So in the mobile, the studies on mobile technology in particular, those were really interesting because what came out of several of those studies was that the learners could use that technology or were already using that technology in their daily lives and in their work. And the use of that ended up having this sort of reinforcement strategy with their learning. So if they were, say, taking like a literacy, going through literacy instruction on their phone or mobile device, or numeracy or things like that, then they were also turning right around using that same device, like to text with family, to do some calculations, you know, for their business or things like that. So there was this really interesting reinforcement loop that came from that particular technology choice, where it is a situated technology. And here I'm evoking the idea, right, of situated cognition, that's something that is in the ether and in the everyday lives of people, seems to provide some additional benefits. Additionally, it strikes learners as authentic, right? It's something they're already using for other purposes, not just for their adult literacy purposes. And their use of that reinforces their learning as well. So some really interesting interaction effects there around mobile technologies. We saw a lot of integration with in-person learning. Now, there's different ways this means many different things. And the way in which programs are integrating some of these technologies with in-person learning can look very different. But in one of the studies, they talked about how they had a teacher shortage of qualified tutors for literacy and numeracy. And so when they rolled out, in that case, that was a mobile technology that they rolled out. When they rolled that out, they found that that actually augmented a program's ability to deliver quality instruction despite having a shortage of teachers. And a number of other programs also talk about how they wove it in with their in-person. And then we've got a program here in New Mexico where their use of this, of a mobile technology is, their classes are overtapped. They're in a very dense, highly urban area. They can't they don't have seats coming open fast enough for students. So students are kind of left in this lurch. They use the mobile technology for when folks come to them, they implement that first. And then if students want to come in and participate in the in-person, they can continue doing that as well. So here, augmentation can mean a lot of things, but this is a really fascinating strategy. Certainly across all of the different technologies, whether it was auto tutor or the mobile tech or the online or the games, anytime that they were using a differentiated approach where students could take sort of a branching pathway through the content, and those involved practice as well as feedback, whether that was automated feedback or one tool has asynchronous feedback from tutors that they provide to students. Those appear to be very effective strategies. And then I don't think we can really say enough about flexibility, autonomy, and dignity. There's one tool out there called Newsela, for example. One of the studies was on that, and they found, actually, let me describe Newsela first. Newsela is a tool that will take the day's news, and they have human transcribers behind it. They tried AI, wasn't great, so they're back to using humans who rewrite the news into different reading levels. And when a user goes into Newsela, they can actually choose whatever reading level they want to read. In the study on Newsela, and again, keep in mind, I'm only citing one, so we need a lot more research in this space. In that study on Newsela, the learners reported that they really liked using the tool because even if they were in a class setting, they could change their reading level without anybody else around them knowing what they were changing that reading level to. That's where the dignity comes in and the autonomy. They also could modulate that depending on if they were reading content they were more familiar with, like sports news, versus content they might be less familiar with, like, I don't know, news on finance and markets. So they can modulate within that as well. And that gives them a lot of flexibility. So I think these start to provide us really good design principles, organizing principles around which to design for adult learners. Okay, so with that, I've laid out the jawbreaker, I've laid out that I think we can do this. Now I think it's time for us to get to work. Is this a global need that we can make a priority? Is this a global need that we can organize around and coordinate on to address? What role might the iLearn community together and individuals within it do as a community of EdTech experts who are dedicated to making a difference in the world? And what can we do to crack this problem? So let's brainstorm and maybe even hatch a plan here. I'm going to stop sharing and now I'm going to open it up to discussion. So please feel free to post in the chat, but also speak up. The floor is yours now.
Oh, thank you, Stephanie. That was fantastic. Again, I'm really, really glad that you were able to make the time and come to do this presentation. There's so much packed into this. There's a lot, and this really is a grand challenge. It's really interconnected, difficult to solve, but I really do think that if people like yourself and maybe iLearn and others could lean in on this challenge, there's definitely progress that could be made, or more progress. I like your chart with the different approaches and studies, and how could we maybe make that a little bit more systematic, and calls like this I think are a good way to raise the alarm. What do y'all think out there?
I'm catching up on the chat.
Yeah, I know I was in the middle of typing one too. Your comment on allowing the learner, the user, as they out, that generic term user, the student to be able to make choices in selecting and adjusting kind of what's presented, how it's presented. They aren't being called out or made to feel bad in any way, that they can just kind of adjust that. I really like that. And in the work that I've done some research with students with learning disabilities, that was a major finding as well, that give somebody an interface that they can adjust to their liking, and you just get a lot of positive outcomes from that.
Yeah, yeah. And thank you, Ken. I missed that entirely. Derek, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, can we bring Derek to
Positive.
the?
1, 2. Can
Yep.
you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi, Derek.
Thanks. Hi there. Thanks, Stephanie. Really very interesting to hear some of these ideas, and I love the idea of a grand challenge. Also very interested to hear about New Zealand. What I've been having fun with is working actually with Wikipedia, with folk that are trying to actually get content in their own vernacular language. And that has been fascinating. And so it's not as formal as New Zealand, but showing people how to play in the sandbox. And then once they are comfortable playing in the sandbox, then moving their articles into the full kind of face of Wikipedia. When you do it in a vernacular language, you're less likely to be speedy deleted by nasty American editors, because no one really speaks that local vernacular language. But there's a real sense of kind of accomplishment and pride.
That is so neat, Derek. I love I kind of love the whole idea of basically hacking some technologies that are out there, right? We just did a thing through OTESA on ethics and design with a design showcase. And one of the sessions that just really kind of caught my attention was one where he was presenting on essentially how to hack devices to make them more energy efficient. And a really clever approach, where I think instead of thinking about what do we need to create, right? Like we have a lot of these things out there, and I love this idea of how you're. And maybe you wouldn't agree with my use of the term hacking here, but it kind of sounds
Yes.
like, how can you hack Wikipedia?
Well, it's how can you make Wikipedia your own, and particularly in your vernacular language, and not mess it up, but make it something that is accurate for your context and for your home language. And there's just so little home language stuff in isiZulu or Xhosa or Tshivenda or whatever kind of local vernacular language we have here in South Africa.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. So, and Jonathan, I'm gonna kind of call you back into the conversation here, but we had a meeting several months ago where I really enjoyed it with Jonathan, where I think when I read the term like immersive learning, what comes to mind for me is a more narrow subset of technologies. But I think for the iLearn community, they're really thinking that term means something that's much broader to them. And so I don't know if it'd be possible for you, Derek, but I would love to see a presentation from you that goes into some detail on what you're doing and how you're going about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah, certainly.
Love to. That'd be great. Let's connect, Derek. That'd be
Thanks,
absolutely great.
Jonathan.
Yeah. Yeah, immersive learning, I think you know, for a long time it was sort of stuck between the spectrum between complete virtuality, where you're encased in the digital, like a virtual reality experience, and on the other side of the Milgram spectrum, they called it, was augmented reality, where you're looking through the magic glass, whether it's your phone or your windshield, or even Meta now has AI empowered glasses that you can put on. And so it's like augmenting the real world. And that's the immersive part, is the world that we're in. And there's kind of mixed reality in between. But immersive is, with this extended reality idea, the immersive has has kind of bloomed into Internet of Things, that you're interacting with the world around you with objects that are smart or not so smart sometimes. Haptic interfaces where you're putting a glove on and being able to feel different things. So it's really a lot of different ways where you can perceive the 360 ecological sense of things surrounding you in a variety of ways. So that's immersive learning is a pretty broad tent at this point and getting bigger.
Yeah. So in looking through the comments here, like there's a couple threads I'd love to pull out. Raj, I see you over there brainstorming about AI and augmented intelligence rather than artificial, and some of your work. I don't know if you feel comfortable speaking up and sharing kind of your thoughts there, but for just clarity here, I know Raj and just adore him. So Raj, I'm so glad to see you here because I feel like this is one of those things where in the work that you do, you could readily pick this up and say, what can we design in this space, and then start testing it. I mean, you're a great researcher, so that would be such a huge contribution here as well. Yeah, go ahead, Raj. I see you've got your audio on, or you did. Okay, I'll leave it at that. If you want to chime in,
Raj,
absolutely feel free to. Okay, sorry. And Ken, actually, another country heard from. I was actually going to call out some of the discussion around learner dignity and autonomy, and actually ask you to speak to that, because this is something that I know is really important to Ken right now. And we've spent a lot of time talking about this too. And so, Ken, I don't know, do you want to say a bit towards that?
I'm happy to in a moment, but I see that Raj's muting issue has been resolved, so I want to cede back to him first.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, Raj.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for the great presentation, Dr. Stephanie. And I feel really fortunate, to be in this presentation. And it feels like it's a call for action to me rather than, to the community. So like you rightly mentioned, it has given me a lot of thoughts on, how to think some of these aspects you have mentioned on the access barriers, thinking of adult literacy as, how to reimagine this space and try to create targeted programs for some of these gaps we have been discussing. And one thought that came to my mind is on how to use this AI as sort of like an exoskeleton for the mind rather than, using it as a commodity to generate something. How can we use it as a augmented intelligence, given with, how to short micro learning scripts and then sort of provide them that just-in-time support. And I have been thinking about this, but, this has been awesome, and with great thoughts. Thank you. Thank you so
Good.
much.
Yeah, that's very Dave Jonathan-esque, right? This idea of mind tools. I think it's funny because for me in the discourse on AI, I've been going back to Jonathan a lot, and this idea of mind tools. How do we design these tools to think about how they're really supporting and augmenting our learning processes? So, Raj, I know, right, Derek? I love that idea of an exoskeleton for the mind too. Like, so Raj, I'm so excited. Like, feel free to reach out to, any of us and connect really, and let us know how we can support you in that. But I can't wait to see what you generate and what you put together. Yeah, you bet. All right, Ken. I think it'd be great to end on a note of learner dignity here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephanie. Again, sorry I'm late. I had a bit of a technical issue and had to transition offices via metro train. But yeah, I am so grateful to you and your work on this in thinking through this framework and these findings and best practices, because I think they are very useful in thinking about addressing the equity issues in reaching learners, particularly with regard to adults, via immersive learning strategies and the like. And I know that I think I invoked a few of these findings as a little bit of a tease, if you will, in my presentation I Learned 2024 a few months ago. And I'm glad that we're able to augment and come back to the source of that. I did, in fact, cite you, of course. But yeah, I mean, I think some of these issues and thinking about acknowledging that immersive learning is in some respects not always it's not immersive in the natural sense of that term, and that we're not necessarily involving people in artificial sensory experiences with all their senses, but rather we're curating attention towards particular sets of inputs. And I think the more that we can do to kind of figure out how to reach learners who might be working through various kinds of obstacles in terms of what represents a realm of psychological safety, for instance, with regard to being able to take in learning. And I know that there were some discussions in the chat. And then this idea of being able to make use of these kind of learning experiences that are allow them to kind of have a privacy to do what they want to accomplish, I think is really helpful. And then I know that you and I are going to be talking next month at the Pro Literacy Conference for focusing on adult learners about how these findings can inform EdTech partnerships at libraries and adult literacy, which I think brings that piece into thinking about augmentation, not replacement. Right. And that's something I think is really interesting as I talk with scholars around the field. I was in a conversation with a scholar at AERA in Philadelphia who talked about the affordances that immersive learning and remote learning provide for students who might have, challenges with regard to childcare or transportation or getting in, and the barriers that those those kinds of things can represent. So I think building these practices in, thinking about the people who are facing the biggest obstacles and how we optimize these platforms to favor them, I think is all to the good in terms of addressing the broader challenge. So again, thank you. Not really a question, maybe that didn't exactly hit on what you're doing, but again, very glad to have you advancing this conversation with our friends at iLearn.
Yeah, and I think that's a great note to end on. I know we are at time. And where I'd really like to end things for us is I hope that folks are feeling sort of charged up and developing a sense of, A, this need is major, it's global, and B, we can do some things about it. And I know that Jonathan and the iLearn community are really ready to support this. And I'd love to see a sort of organized, coordinated conversation coming together through iLearn, for example, on, what are we learning? What are we building? What are we learning? How are we building this knowledge? And how are we moving that ball down the field?
Boy, if I was just a couple of days or maybe just one day short on being able to do more here, and we really wanted to do this. We could. So Stephanie, we have a forum inside of our website. We wanted to name the forum the same as your webinar and invite you to come in. So we could seed the forum with links, and then following the webinar, we could invite people to come in and continue the conversation. And I definitely could do that, and we could try to grab everybody's email. Well, since everyone registered, they could do that. But we're absolutely excited to collaborate with you and the Barbara Bush Foundation and Ken on tackling this problem, and we would love to be able to move the needle on some of these things. So thank you so much for coming, and everyone for participating and supporting the issues around adult literacy and all of your great work. So this is fantastic. Yeah, we'll see if we can pull together a follow-up here. I'll invite you to, so go to the Immersive Learning Research Network's main website and just sign up for a profile, and we'll try to elevate people to the forum, and we'll get that started. This is like we're
Sounds
just
good.
trying this out. So, okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.